Hello, welcome to the FANHS Museum. Terry will take care of that, the welcoming. Last month, I was at a meeting in Seattle and happened to meet somebody that I knew of but had never met before, Professor Emil De Guzman. So we chatted with him some there and got his card, and I thought, wow, it sure would be nice to have him come to speak at the museum. I thought he might be too busy for that. We checked with him anyway, and here he is, Dr. Emil De Guzman. Professor De Guzman got his bachelor's degree at Berkeley and his master's at Harvard, which is a little school back east. He's currently a professor of ethnic studies at Sacramento State, and has also taught ethnic studies and Filipino American history and Asian American history, and what is that thing? Community organizing. I want to know what community organizing is. And also he's taught and written, I believe, about slavery in the U.S., African slavery. He does amazing things. He's also the executive director, or has been in the past at least, of the San Francisco Police Department Crime Prevention Agency, and there he takes care of protecting seniors and disabled people in high crime areas, kind of like our area here. And he does it himself because he's a martial artist too. He does judo and kendo, and what's the other one? Wrestling. Okay, judo and kendo and wrestling. Professor De Guzman also lives part-time in the Philippines on the island of Negros in the northeastern part, close to a place called Bacolod, where he farms rice, and maybe we can get him to say something about that later too. Because he doesn't farm rice for a profit, he farms rice to help local people. So I just wanted to make it my pleasure to introduce Professor Emil De Guzman. Can we have a big hand for him?
Well, I'm just going to do a very short introduction. As Richard said, there's a number of things in my background. I was the leader of the International Hotel Tenants Association. As you can see, these are some of the exhibits of the people who are in the struggle. You have, founders. These are the founders along with me of the Manilatown Heritage Foundation. We put that together in 1996. This is a photo of me getting dragged out by the cops.
Yes,
You have, take a look at these exhibits. We had a big fundraiser in 1976, and this is the poster, and as you can see, it's $1.50. Now, how can you do a fundraiser with $1.50?
Oh, dinner, the dinner.
Yeah, well, dinner.
At dinner.
Dinner too. Dancing, dinner, And then you have a bunch of, you have this, which is, again, we won't move. This was our slogan. We refuse to move. And then lastly, there was a group called Kearny Street Workshop, and they produced a lot of things about the struggle, art, culture, so much. It's a way for us to memorialize. As time goes on, we have artifacts like this that really capture some of the things. This is the judge, this is the owner, and this is a tenant. And it just basically represents, in essence, the struggle. Now, I want to throw out one other thing. I'm also brought these, which is a poster. And the poster is about Banana Village. Now, these men and women were predominantly leaders, the heroes that led the farm workers' strike in 1965. So they were all heroes. They all went out on strike.
In what city?
Delano, California.
Delano.
They all walked off the fields.
Delano.
They defied the growers, and they basically began the strike. And it's later that the Mexicans under Cesar Chavez joined in, and then that led toward a sort of like a shot around the world, because their grape boycott was worldwide, and they were able to shut down the grapes and get the contracts. I'm selling these. I made these because it's important to pass on history. That's what I'm about. Now, I don't want to really get into it, but let's see the film, and then we can go from there. All right?
Thank you.
Tell me when to start.
Okay.
Okay. I'm very happy to be here at the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum. This is really a major honor for me to come here and to be among you. I wanted to kind of point out that in a film like this, it's really an example of the people's resistance. You see a lot of resistance. You have a lot of people out there on the streets and battling with the police. But you have to understand that that really only happened within the last year of the struggle, 1976 into 1977. So it's important to try to, I'm going to try to give balance to this. But before I do that, I want to thank Richard as well as Terry for inviting me to come here today, and my old friend Elena, way back there, very close friend who I've known for a number of years, to be here and to really spend time in this city, which to me is really one of the major cities where Filipinos were populated. That is, they really, when we talk about the Central Valley, we have to talk about what Filipinos did to the economy of this area, because the work that they did, I mean, as a small child, I can remember all the crates of asparagus that would always go to our house from relatives here. So I really have this admiration for Stockton and what Stockton represents. And we have to do a great deal more to popularize places like the city of Stockton. My role as a historian is really to try to speak on those key people and those stories that have been left out of American history. That is, that we're talking about people who lived in this country and who did a great deal to make the difference, but then they're excluded. And to me, that's really the whole thrust of why we talk about the importance of history, why we have this amazing museum to be able to educate people about this. Because we're sort of clobbered every day by all this, advertising and all this fake news and these things, but really, so much of us have our heritage, our roots, in places like Stockton, like Delano, like San Francisco, like Seattle. So I wanted to, I do come here to see relatives and family, mostly cluster ground, Hammer Lane. And my earliest days was coming here with my father to visit my cousin who lived in the South Side, and she was married to a monomoy by the name of Philip. And one time, my father, they asked me, he said, "Well, do you guys like asparagus?" I said, "Sure." And then this monomoy was like really, would take me out in the field, and he would just be prancing, dancing up and down, picking up, his, using his knife, cutting all this asparagus. Meanwhile, I was melting in the sun. I just couldn't take it. So it's a memory. When we look at this film, I kind of have to laugh a lot because because there's a lot of humor besides obviously the tragedy, but there's just a lot that comes out of me. It's like a discovery every time I'm looking at it. So I'm a historian of the Asian American history. I'm a lecturer, professor at California State University of Sacramento, and I'm specific on Asian American history. And I was offered this job because I do a lot of lectures on history, and pretty much I've lived it, since my involvement with the IOTL began. Actually, began even be further. I used to work in Delano. My whole history was a curiosity about Filipino American history, and there weren't too many books. So what I did is I went to Delano and I learned it by talking to these guys. These are the heroes. These are just like the tenants of the IOTL. They taught me. It was introduced by Richard that I went to Berkeley and I went to Harvard, and these are the two obviously world-class universities, but these are like those teachers. I've always really had wonderful. So I made a poster so that they would be able to be recognized, because that's what history is about. It's about making sure that you give recognition. I mean, here you got the tenants, right? Here's Frankie de los Reyes, and here's Anacleto Muniz, and here's Domingo, and Al Robles, the guy who is there with the book, talking to Mano Frankie, Bill Fallon, Joe Dionis. I mean, to me, history is about people and making sure that you give credit. And that's what I do. It's not amorphous. It's not just something that's historic. It has to have meaning. So every historian has to have a look at any period from a higher vantage point, because it's to reflect on the causes behind an event. The international hotel struggle began 54 years ago, in 1968. And later I became a history professor, which allows me to kind of reflect back and to look at the past and understand the myriad of events that took place in that struggle as a participant. This was a total of 9 years, from 1968 to 1977. So I've tried to put all the pieces and the people together into some very coherent narrative, so that, the film is excellent as far as giving you a background, and certainly I'm so valued. I mean, I could never have explained it, all the things that happened, unless it's within some context. So seeing the film, I'm sure really helped for you to understand, see the horror of what people had to go through. Okay. So it stands in San Francisco as a towering inferno, and it is really, etched in the history of Filipino Americans, Manilatown, Chinatown, North Beach, and Chinese American history. August 4th rattled the world. The most brutal, horrifying, deadly violence versus the nonviolence between hundreds of police and thousands of supporters who were on that street.
What year was that?
1977. August 4th, 1977. A standoff, a display between highly equipped armed police and sheriffs versus unarmed supporters who stood there facing horses and swinging batons, bravely standing there with their bodies. So you witness the bloody, the brutal assault on the film, and it explains that what the distortion is that oftentimes people they know about the IOTL because they see this, right? But then so much of that period was really a very peaceful period, a period of a great, glorious attempt to try to run a business. I mean, none of us knew how to run a hotel, but we took it over, after negotiating with the owner with a 3-year lease. So we had to learn how to run a business. It was a frightening proposition, and there was no money. We had to earn our money by the rents, and the rents were really cheap. $45 a month is what I paid for my rent. Can you imagine $45 a month? And then there was like, if you had a window on the street, you had $50 a month. So we weren't making tons of money. So we were being in charge of caring for our elderly, which was a daunting task, and there was very little maintenance ever done in the building. No one was taking care of our elderly and our sick, and this became our priority. So we had to really run a business, and we had to learn how to run a hotel. And we knew that it couldn't be the way that the landlord and the owner ran it, because they ran it into the ground. I mean, they didn't care. And that's how they really were able to evict all the other hotels up and down Kearny Street. There was about a 10-block community, 10,000 people living there, and over time they were all shut down, they were all evicted to make way for the high-rise. There's a picture in there of Kearny Street, way up on top, on the hill, the Telegraph Hill, and it's just high-rises. To me, it's a graveyard. I call it a graveyard of what Kearny Street used to be. So it's important that we realize what we lost. They picked on the last building, the last block, and they ran into a buzzsaw. That is the owner. I was a student at Berkeley. We had just won an ethnic studies college, and that really set in motion a whole other different direction in academia, because so much of academia was really more Western and really did not take into account the specifics of people of color, of our histories, or our sociological or social sciences. So we had self-determination that we can run and best teach our people and our communities. And we were able to win there. It was really because of that that allowed me to get involved in the International Hotel, because in March, right after we won the strike, I got involved in the I Hotel because, as they mentioned here, a fire that killed 3 tenants set in motion by a arsonist. Now, this was proven by the San Francisco Fire Department because someone had shut a door, they lit a fire, and then that fire grew, and then when they opened it, a surge of oxygen went in the air, and it completely blew off the top, of that floor. Killed 3 of them. No one was ever held accountable for that murder. It was murder. So the tenants were killed in that room, and as I pointed out, our top priority in taking over the hotel was to pay attention to their needs. Get them caregivers who could cook and clean for them. Make sure they had their medical problems addressed. We made sure that they got to see the doctors. Mostly all were bachelors without families. They never married due to the anti-miscegenation laws in California, which prohibited Filipinos from marrying outside their race. Well, look, the ratio of men to women was only 15-1. So there were many Filipino women. And if you were, courting or trying to get married, which happened, you could go to the state of Washington and you could get married up there. But as Margaret Moikel points out, she had to be very careful when she would be walking down the street with Mano Johnny, her husband. There was one man that pointed out on downtown in Market Street a lynching of a Filipino because he was walking with a white woman. That's the horror. That was the danger that Margaret had to go through, that would happen. That these relationships were natural. people kind of getting to know and like other people. But that's the anti-miscegenation laws in California made it was against the law, and you go to jail. So I pointed out that was our top priority, to make sure that our tenants were making sure that they were taken care of. And that made a big difference, because people who were elderly, by the way, I want to point out, we were all volunteers. No one was paid. We all just donated our time and our effort. Young people just donated their time and their effort. They were poor without pensions or savings. They had only what they got because they were paid low wage for working in jobs and as farm workers or working in the canneries. Not much for Social Security. The second responsibility was taking an old building and making it safe and decent to live. So we're talking, as I pointed out, it was really a horrible, it was a slum. The furniture was ancient, the roofs were dark due to the old wallpaper, the rugs were horrible, filthy, the electrical system was not modern. So it was shocking to live in the hotel, and we set out our attempt to try to make that change, make that difference. Because we had to make it safe. This was not just a place where people could live. It had to be decent. It had to be clean. It had to be maintained. The struggle then went on, and we were able to really, one of the things I want to point out about my experience is that after the third world strike at Berkeley and San Francisco State, there was a sort of a renaissance where Asian American students just gravitated towards social justice. That is, they got involved in nonprofits and hospitals because they knew that they had to be involved to understand the nature of their own communities. Housing in Chinatown, they're just seeing many homeless among our elderly families. These were the injustices, these were the social problems that affected us. Yet it was really this drive of people coming, students from the universities coming to iHotel. And over the next 2 years, we were able to get people to come in, take out those filthy rugs and paint those rooms and get new furniture. That really made a big difference. It was that tidal wave, that massive effort. And students were coming from all over, University of Washington, Seattle, UCLA, universities and other parts of the country. They would come to visit. They would work with me, because I was in charge of the volunteers. They would come and we would make sure that we put in the work. This was a transformation. It wasn't just a building. It was a people's home. It was a community. It was a place where people where there was great reverence, respect for our elderly. And this is the way it should be. Not just living in a place, a slum where you're probably faced with dying alone, without anybody. No, we have to make that difference. That was our next priority, transform the building to make it safe. The other thing is politically we had to make sure that we had to build friends, get people to support the iHotel. And as you could see, thousands of people just got out there. But that took a lot of time. We went into the churches, we went into the labor unions, we went into the, into other parts of California, building friends. Other people from around the world would come. See, the iHotel was a landmark. It was a place where people saw something new and different. And they saw people in charge. There was a slogan at that time called "Power to the People." This was by by the Black Panthers. And we just felt that, we just felt the enormous power of people. It was like tectonic, moving from one part of the, moving heaven and earth. And that's really what we were depending on to fight. That political front, building that kind of base of resistance was really how we were going to be able to fight and win. So by the time you get to 1976, 77, you see massive numbers of people. Well, we had done our homework. It wasn't just us young people, it was our elderly working with us, intergenerational. It was that kind of unity that was very forceful, that people were hearing from the tenants themselves what this meant for them to be able to fight for their home.
Excuse me.
Yes.
It appears that the political, those in power, the sheriff at the time, Christopher.
Oh yeah,
Christensen,
Mayor
and-
Christopher.
And then Moscone, who was the mayor at the time.
Later, right.
Yeah, it seemed like they were really behind the Filipinos and the eviction, according to what I saw. I mean, they had jobs to do. A mayor has his job and the sheriff has his job, but it seemed they had sympathy for the Filipinos, according to your. Was it truly that
I
way?
would just have to disagree.
Huh?
Mayor Christopher
Huh?
led the redevelopment.
What's that?
Mayor Christopher, he led the redevelopment to clear out the Western Addition and Yerba Buena. See, when it got to us in the late 60s, so much was done to destroy the Fillmore and the Yerba Buena area. Why? Because they wanted the convention center. There is what they call a Yerba Buena Convention Center.
Mhm.
Well, that used to be blocks of housing, for mostly sailors and single people and elderly, because this was affordable for them, but it was all cleared out, which made housing much more scarce, made overcrowded much worse, created conditions to make, more homelessness. And as you saw in the film, you saw the Fillmore district with a lot of vacant land. Well, a lot of that was all torn down. So they were the problem. They wanted San Francisco to be a world-class city to compete, but they had to get rid of, the people on that land because it was far too valuable. Now I'll give you something. I traveled in other parts of the world, in the Philippines as well as in Korea and Asia, and I see the same thing. When the land becomes so much more, the central part of a city is so invaluable that they just clear it out. They have to make way for high-rises, and they have to make way for businesses that are going to produce the kind of profits to build out the economy. And that's exactly what they did in San Francisco. So, no, they really did. In fact, if they really did care, and this was our whole point of why we even fought, was for more housing, more affordable housing, where people could live in dignity and safe. But what do? You saw it. Tenants got thrown into the street just with the clothes on their back and just what they could carry out. And then they had no place to go. We had no place to go, to eat, to cook, and we were all thrown in the street. And then the housing that they could find, they would vulnerable. They would be robbed, or they would be targets of violence by criminals. Many of our tenants died of a broken heart because they lost their community. They lost their friends.
They traded that for what they have now, Market Street and the horrible scene of the drugs on Market Street.
I have to agree with you. It's the city of San Francisco's really fallen to another new level.
It's in bad shape right now.
It's really horrible. You think things are bad, and then, they were far worse,
Mhm.
far more problems with anti-Asian violence, anti-elderly. So I'm dealing with that. I just wanted to make one last thing. What you don't see is what the new building looks like, because there were two periods. One is the period from 1968 to 1977, where we were evicted, and then from 1994 to 2005, when we got a new building, high hotel, up on the same site. We were under President Clinton. They put up $7.6 million to be able to buy the land from the owner, and then they were able to build a construction partnership with the city, the Archdiocese, and now we have a 16-story structure, $30 million high-rise, where people are living in subsidized housing. So, yeah, we were able to land on our feet. But those tenants who got evicted, they were the ones who we cannot forget. You know, that's why on the bottom floor in the Manilatown Center we have a place where we enshrine their struggle, enshrine them, give them the recognition for having fought. But they basically fought knowing that later other people would benefit from it. So you had a question?
I have a statement and a question.
Oh, sure.
What's cool about all of this is, and you finally said the word, I was listening,
Yeah.
dignity. So, you know, people tend to organize money to take away dignity. And sometimes dignity is organized in a way that you can counteract that force.
Right.
And so my question, which is kind of related to my statement, is what's going on right now? What do you see out there in our society today that parallels what we just saw in the film and what you've been talking about?
We used to have a safety net in this country for people who were falling through the cracks. We really don't have that anymore. I mean, so much of our country's economy is devoted toward other things, but when it comes down to the lower class or people who are not in the middle class, there's just, I mean, looking at education, looking at healthcare, looking at housing, I just see that it's just rampant. I mean, I came into town early, and I happened to be driving by the freeway right there near 4, and I just saw all these tents, and every time I come to Stockton, it looks like Oakland to me. There's a lot of people out there in the street. I just don't think that the way that the politicians, the way they look, they're not looking at remedies. They're not looking at real, genuine ways, creative ways to be able to make the difference, to address the needs of the homeless or homeless families. And we have our problems in San Francisco too. But I think that we're not. I mean, the people who run this country continuously make us believe that we are a great country, when in fact so many of our people have really so many of our people cannot find jobs or cannot find a way of making a living and rising up. So, I'm out there myself, involved in campaigns to try to get people elected in November, elected Kearny. I still believe in the electoral process, but I study every candidate real carefully. But I don't know if I'm answering your question. I'm sort of rambling, but I believe that the other thing I just point out is that one person yourself can make a difference. I mean, I certainly, an example of myself, I just decided I was going to fight. I just decided I was going to do something to help my community and give without asking anything in return. So I think that's really kind of the attitude that you have to instill. And people kind of attribute me to sort of being a leader in these things. I'm not a leader, I'm a team builder. I'm out there trying to educate other people to join me. Because the more people you can get out there to make a difference, the better. you know. You know, I'm 75 now. And in my younger days, I used to, I come from a background of Catholic school, and I used to be a volunteer, you know, when I was a teenager. But those values, you know, that kind of philosophy, and then I became a revolutionary. In other words, I became a political activist. But all those kind of values really have sustained me. And, you know, I feel that I'm not alone. I look at the papers and I look at television, I see all these other people who are doing great, wonderful things too. So I just know I'm not the only one thinking like they are. I mean, I'm just grateful that I'm just part of a bigger movement of people who see the difference, wanting to make the difference.
Gosh, I hope you're right. I mean, the fact that you haven't changed your stripes over these 55 years is to be commended. Because a lot of people that, you know, went through that period in history have given up.
Yeah. I mean, our generation, which was, you know, fighting the Vietnam War, there was a lot of protests among young people. I thought, well, where are they? You know, our generation basically kind of got absorbed into the system without any, you know, doing anything. I'm not trying to criticize anybody. I'm just saying that at a time when we have all these millennials who are really, to me, fueling, making a difference, I think some of us as old guys have to be there to kind of help them out. And that's really why I teach at college, or why I'm there in the community working. Because some of us old guys have to work with the young guys, just like the old guys worked with me when I was a young guy, because you know, we depended a lot on their wisdom. You know, we had the energy, the strength, the power, but they had wisdom, and that's what I really benefited from. Now let me make one last point. It's 45 years since the eviction happened. Our whole thing will die for iHotel unless we do something about education. I'm pushing teachers, you know, instructions in order to teach in the public schools and in the private schools. We need to keep educating people. You know, I love doing this. In fact, I'm right in line with all this, because to me it's just wonderful to feel like I'm connected with what you guys are all about. But history is, to me, as I said, being able to express and tell the stories and name the people who are left out of American history. You know, we're not going to change anybody if we don't pay attention to that. And that's what I do. What I do. You can. I have my business cards here. Yeah, you can call me up. Tell me you want me to come someplace. Maybe I can show up. And maybe we can do more. But I just, you know, till the end of my days, I'm just going to continue to keep doing this, because if we don't do it, you know, all this will be lost. You know, none of the young people will be able to really know where their roots are.
Do you have pictures of the iHotel today?
Pictures?
Pictures of the hotel today?
You know what? I don't have it with me. I should print it and make sure I include it. But it's really a beautiful building.
It's beautiful.
I had an opportunity to go there, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was interesting. Yeah.
These are, you know, these are my brothers. Well, they passed away. We're the founders of the Manilatown Center, and we were the ones sitting at the table to get the new building up. Both of them have passed away. Richard was the classmate of Bill, so he knew this guy. So these are all on my wall in my house. But I decided I'm going to bring them all for you guys to take a look at. This is something that came from the Kearny Street workshop. This is really a nice gift they gave me. But you know, any other questions you have, I'd be go on
I
to.
have a couple of questions.
Yes.
One is, who owns the I Hotel now? It's a 501c3.
Yeah, it's run by the International Tenants. I mean, International Hotels Senior Housing Inc., which is made up of community people. So these are people on our side, you know, who preserve it.
There are a lot of Japanese names associated with, in the credits. And I was wondering, why so much Japanese involved? I'm just curious.
Well, you know, part of it is that they were part of my generation. A lot of them were in the third world strikes at Berkeley and San Francisco State. You know, they're not just Japanese, but Chinese. And
Yeah, I know, that's right next to Chinatown, so it
Yeah.
surprised me.
well, Japanese because they were skilled, you know, they had skills. They were historical researchers. They did, you know, some of the, they had technical skills, filming. But we were all close. We were all very, very close. And I was very, you know, I just benefited from the fact that they had me on film. But I had nothing to do with the film. They just produced it. But no, it was that kind of fraternity that existed among us as Asian Americans. I have to give credit to the fact that, you know, if it wasn't for Japanese and Chinese Americans, we wouldn't have been able to fight in the beginning, because there was very few Filipinos who were really active in the very, very beginning among the students, because we didn't have the numbers, you know, at that time, 68 and 69, but there were a lot of Japanese Americans and Chinese Americans who were actively involved in helping to fight in the beginning.
What's the current ethnic makeup of the residents?
Mostly Chinese. And that's because every time they open it up, there's a flood of Chinese who apply. So, you know, they just get their people in. Some of our tenants, when they first opened up, the Filipinos that were elderly were from the Philippines. They were not of the generation of the Monos. So they were reluctant because they didn't want to live in Chinatown. They didn't want to live on Kearny Street. So we didn't get very, very many. But you know what, it's okay. You know, we were able to provide housing for people, and that was our point. That was our purpose.
Does anybody have any more questions? Because it's
Any
getting...
comments?
Well, I have a comment, yeah. I'd like to share with
I don't think I need this because I think everybody's. Yeah, go ahead.
you. In 1968, I moved to San Francisco, and I remembered at the time the group of people I was with, you know, they were the beatnik era, and they would go down, and there was a name you mentioned earlier on, the hungry eye. It triggered a memory in me that I'd almost forgotten, that how much it was such a popular place to go down there, because that was North Beach. All the jazz was down there, the beatniks were there, and this hotel was in the middle of all of that. I can remember several times parking right in front of it, in front of the restaurant and everything, and they would always say, oh, you know, that's the Filipino hotel, and then go to the Hungry Eye and, you know, hang around in that era. And then came the song, Kearny Street. It's a wonderful song by Rod McEwen. And I think he mentions something, you know, about the people he talks about the people who lived on Kearny Street. And anyways, 45 years later, I find myself walking into the International Hotel. So, you know, full circle. But it was really a walk down memory lane, so thank you.
Yeah, the Hungry Eye is a famous nightclub.
Not nightclub, very famous. It was right around the corner.
Yeah. Well, it was in the basement.
Oh, it was in the basement,
Yeah.
That's
So
right, yeah,
people like
yeah.
Barbara Streisand,
Barbra
Saul,
Streisand.
you know, all these
All
big
the
names.
big names,
Yeah.
jazz musicians, and
You know, Purple Onion was across the street.
right around,
But all these famous businesses, they all got their start at the Hungry Eye. Yeah. And it's interesting, I've always wondered, where did the eye come from? It guy from my hotel, international hotel.
International.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, yeah, no, there's that real rich history. Even way back in the 1880s, when Commodore Perry opened up trade with, Japan, the delegation that came from Japan to go to Washington to meet with the president at that time, I'm not sure the name, they lived in the Indian International Hotel at that time. And then I think it burned down during the earthquake, 1906. So then they had to rebuild on it.
When all this was going on, it was so much in the news constantly. That scene where they're being evicted and you see them being pushed out by the place. I believe I was living in New York at the time, and I remember turning the television on, and that came on. And I'm going, oh my God, that's what's going on right now in San Francisco, and I say, God, I used to walk right there.
Yeah, this photo was on the front cover of the New York Times, Baltimore Sun, Boston Globe, Chicago Tribune, I think even in Europe. A cub reporter for the Examiner took the photo, and then it was just all over the country. So I kind of got famous, because of this. But
Is that you?
that's me. Yeah, I was beaten up by the cops. So what I'm doing is I'm making a poster. Like I did this, I'm going to make another poster of me, so that way, people have some memorabilia about the island. I'm having fun. Hey, look, this thing happened 45 years ago, but I just enjoy coming to crowds, coming to groups like you guys, and, just sharing with you. If we had some beer or something, that'd be, we could really have a good time. But this is just, it's kind of like being a minstrel, musician, songwriter. I just think I've just got something to share.
Any other comments or anything? We thank you guys for coming and for coming to our museum. This is something that we do. We try to do once a month, the third Sunday of the month, if possible, have a speaker either in person or via Zoom. So, and then don't forget that October is Filipino American History Month. So there's a lot of activities going on. And we really thank you guys for coming to the only national Filipino American History Museum in the United States. So, if you have time to look around, please do so.
Thank you, Professor.